This is the Late Round Podcast with your host, JJ Zacharisa.
What's up, everyone? It's JJ Zacharisa, the editor-in-chief at FanDuel and at numberfire.com, and this is episode 360 of the Late Round Podcast, one of the many shows that are part of the FanDuel Podcast Network. Thanks for tuning in. Before getting to the mailbag questions this week, I wanted to send you guys another reminder that with most of the sports world on hold, horse racing is still alive. FanDuel is doing its part to continue to bring sports fans excitement by offering users the chance to bet on horse racing. Use your existing FanDuel DFS login credentials to gain access to tutorials to learn more about the sport, including understanding how the odds work, the various types of bets, and most importantly, how you can win your bets. Watch all of the races live across over 300 tracks and fill the void left in your sports fandom today. For more details, visit racing.fanduel.com or download the FanDuel app today. Eligibility restrictions apply. This first question is an email. It says, "Hey JJ, it seems that everyone is so low on Kerryon Johnson due to his injury history and inability to stay healthy. But they seem to forget that Dalvin and Fournette had similar first 2 years. Kerryon played in 16 games, Dalvin 15, Fournette 21. He's only 22, and with the Lions likely not adding a running back of consequence, that could change, of course, is it crazy to think that he can have a third-year breakout similar to the aforementioned guys? Hope you and the fam are doing great during these crazy times. Keep up the great work, Ethan." Thanks, Ethan. So Johnson was one of my sells earlier in the offseason because, number one, I don't think that we can assume he's going to see an elite workload in that offense. But number two, I've said that I think Detroit is a lower key team to watch when it comes to taking a running back fairly early in the draft. I don't think probability is on that side, but I do think it's possible. I've said it before, though. I think Kerryon Johnson is good. If I was coaching the Lions, I would be using Kerryon Johnson. But he's been hurt. And when they started giving him a bigger workload last year, he then got hurt. It's not unreasonable to think that the Lions aren't totally all in on Johnson. I also don't think the Dalvin Cook and Leonard Fournette comparisons are very fair. During Fournette's first 2 years, he had a prorated rush share of 63% and 64%. That's the percentage of rushing attempts that he saw for his team. His target share prorated over 16 games was 11.4% and about 10%. Dalvin Cook was on pace for a rushing share of 59% and 54%, and a target share of 12% over his first 2 seasons. Meanwhile, Kerryon Johnson's prorated rushing shares over his first 2 years are 47% and 55%. His target shares are 11% and 5.5%. I know that I just threw a lot of numbers at you, and this is a quick and dirty way of answering this, but compared to those other guys, we're looking at lower numbers in total from a prorated rate for Kerryon Johnson. And we're also comparing Johnson to a favorable outcome. If we get fixated on the favorable outcome, we can make bad decisions because we're ignoring the unfavorable ones, which is Johnson becoming a committee back. Now, I do think that in his range of outcomes is being a workhorse. I really liked Johnson last year for that reason and for that potential. But there's still downside that we have to recognize. This next question is from @bballclub. In a rookie draft with the influx of wide receiver talent this year, where are you starting to look at Burrow as an option, and what do you see for his overall outlook? And then @GoatWaddles actually responded to that tweet and said, as a follow-up to that, would you ever consider taking him at the end of round 1 in a single quarterback league? So I haven't done rankings yet, but I can easily answer that second question and say that no, I wouldn't be taking him at the end of round 1. Right now, there's a lot of value in the late first and early second rounds of rookie drafts, especially at wide receiver. You should be able to get an impact player there, whether it's Denzel Mims, Justin Jefferson, or Laviska Shenault. And we're likely going to have a little bit more clarity after the draft is over. Some of those good players may drop a bit if the landing spot isn't ideal. But since it's the wide receiver position that we're mostly talking about, we should be more focused on talent anyway. I generally am lower on rookie quarterbacks than most are in single quarterback leagues. I think the early to mid-second round makes sense for Joe Burrow, which is basically where his ADP will be. But I'll likely be more inclined to get him in the mid-second given the talent in this year's class. This next question is from @NoFreakingClue. What are your thoughts on Deshaun Watson this year versus last year? How much does the loss of Hopkins and gain of David Johnson really affect him? If anything, I think it will make the Texans rely on Watson and his rushing ability more. Bill O'Brien be damned. I think it's going to impact him in a big enough way to push him down rankings. I love Watson, but DeAndre Hopkins is arguably the best wideout in football. You take him off a team, and that changes that team. And they can change in a lot of different ways. The team may not run as many plays because they're not as efficient. They may not throw the ball at the same rate. And they may just not be as efficient in general, which will hurt Watson's numbers. I'm also assuming that the question here is geared towards designed runs. Because do keep in mind that according to PFF, Watson was second in scrambles last year and he was first in scrambles 2 years ago. I'm not sure we're going to see designed runs jump to the point where it'll offset the loss of DeAndre Hopkins. In fact, we shouldn't bank on that whatsoever. My projections have Watson as more of a mid-range QB1 right now, when he was capable of having a higher-end QB1 season with DeAndre Hopkins. This move hurt him. This last question is an email. It says, "Hey JJ, love the show, but I have to admit, I listen to other fantasy football podcasts on the side. Sorry, it's okay. Anyway, I'm hearing that David Johnson is going to be a viable RB2 with RB1 upside based on the volume that he's walking into. I understand the argument, but watching his film over the last 2 years, it seems obvious he has lost his burst, and really it looks like it has been diminishing for 2 years. As a numbers-driven analyst yourself, is there a point at which you say, I know the opportunity is there, but I just don't trust the player anymore based on what I'm seeing? Wishing you and your family good health, you too, Nick." My basic philosophy with running back talent is that, yes, I do believe that the difference between one running back to the next is generally not that big because the position is replaceable. There are lots of good running backs. There's an excess supply. I care about running back talent, though, because teams are going to care about running back talent. If David Johnson sucks, he can lose his job. And then I care about wide receiver and tight end talent because talent matters more at those positions to get targets and get production. One way of figuring out talent is by looking at data. Another way to see if a player is good or not is by watching that player play. I know that I'm a numbers-driven analyst, and I think that's important because fantasy football is a game about numbers. But I still watch every single football game every single week. I have takes on players based on what I'm seeing. And I agree with you, David Johnson has looked slower and not nearly as dynamic over the last year and a half. My projections are going to reflect that in some way, whether it's worse efficiency or the projection weighing that Johnson may not be able to keep his job. Like, it's not as though Johnson's being projected for 300 carries. Part of that is because of what we've seen from him over the last 2 years. So I guess the direct answer to your question is that even though I'm analytical, I'm still ranking players based off what I'm seeing and how I'm thinking a player's floor and ceiling is based on that. This next question is from @JCBurner1. Big fan of the Carolina receivers. Big fan of Robby Anderson. Not a fan of them combining. How much will this hurt everyone involved? Receivers? CMC? Probably helps Teddy Bridgewater, though. So a lot's changing in Carolina. There's a new regime. There's a new quarterback. So using 2019 and those numbers isn't going to tell us everything. But it can at least help make the point that I'm trying to make here. Last year, DJ Moore had a 22.4% target share, and Curtis Samuel was at 17.7%. The rest of the wide receivers on that team were at over 15.5% combined. 18.7% of their targets went to tight ends, and 25.7% went to the running back position. Christian McCaffrey has seen between 22.7 and 23.7% of the Panthers' targets in each of his 3 seasons in the league. We can probably keep him around that range next year, even with a new regime. Or maybe a percentage point lower at most. I wouldn't expect Robby Anderson to drastically change our projection for Christian McCaffrey. But let's just focus on wide receiver share. In order for Moore and Samuel to maintain their target shares from last year, they would need Robby Anderson to come in and gobble up a lot of the remaining targets, not their target share. They need Robby Anderson to see the 15.5% target share that the other wide receivers in that offense were seeing. And he'll likely take a lot of that on. But since DJ Moore is super talented and good, any additional target share that Robby Anderson gets is naturally likely to come from Curtis Samuel. That's especially true because Samuel was used as a deep ball guy last year. He led the team in air yards, and almost 35% of his targets came 15 or more yards down the field. That's Robby Anderson's game. So to me, this hurts Samuel a bit. I still trust this coaching staff to use their players in the right way. Curtis Samuel is more than a deep ball threat. And I do think that there's a world where both Anderson and Samuel can be in that 80 to 100 target range, depending on how that depth chart sort of pans out. So Samuel got hurt the most, I think, with this move. But I don't think that we should overstate what this all means, given the change in coaching staff and the current Panthers depth chart. And honestly, you could argue that Robby Anderson signing there is better for Curtis Samuel than them spending decent draft capital on a wide receiver. This last question is from @RunGameTruther. Do you adjust opportunity based on the previous season's efficiency? If so, how? For example, how should we project the volume of an efficient player like A.J. Brown to increase going forward? Similarly, should we expect less volume from an inefficient player like Le'Veon Bell? Thanks. I think that we're oversimplifying things by simply saying Le'Veon Bell was inefficient or A.J. Brown was efficient last year. And if and when we see swings in volume, we may attribute those swings incorrectly and say that it's because of efficiency or lack of efficiency. When in reality, we know there's a lot more going on there. The Jets are tied to Le'Veon Bell in a lot of ways. Financially, yes, but also the fact that there's not a lot of competition for looks in that backfield right now. Even though Bell was inefficient, it's highly unlikely the Jets are going to say, oh, Le'Veon Bell had a yards per carry that was below average last year, so we got to use him less. And then with A.J. Brown, just using that as an example, but with A.J. Brown, he's a second-year wide receiver who was also productive with a pretty high target share in year one. A.J. Brown had a target share of almost 20% last year. And we know that that target share got better and better as the season went on. During the second half of the year, his target share per game was almost 10 percentage points higher compared to the first half. So it's not the efficiency that I'm looking at when projecting his 2020 target share. It's just natural trajectory. It's competition. It's play calling tendencies. And remember, volume is what correlates stronger to next season volume than any efficiency metric will, by far. And also remember, not every good player is efficient, and not every bad player is inefficient. There's usually reason like average depth of target or general offensive effectiveness that helps explain things like yards per target or yards per carry. So I guess my answer to this question is that no, I don't heavily weigh efficiency metrics when projecting next season volume. There are so many other concrete factors that influence those numbers. That's going to do it for today's show, though. Thanks to all of you for listening. If you've yet to subscribe to the Late Round Podcast, make sure you are by searching for it pretty much anywhere podcasts can be found. And if you're listening to the show on Apple Podcasts, do me a favor and leave a rating and review. And don't forget to follow me on Twitter @LateRoundQB. Thanks, everyone. Stay safe, stay inside, wash your hands, love on your family, and enjoy your weekend.